Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of I Am I. My name is Joshua Ansley, and this week I'm going to talk about layers. And ironically, this happened by chance. I actually don't have any on. Well, I guess I kind of do have a little man bush layer here. 60% of the time it works every time. Take it easy, ladies. That's just not for free. You got to earn it. All right. So anyway, talking about layers, right? So a couple weeks ago, I did a vlog on the koshas, right? Which is literally all about the layers, the bodies, the sheaths that we have surrounding that immaculate, divine core self, which is who we truly are, right? So, but also within the layers themselves, there are layers. There's really just layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, right? And one of the big things is, it's kind of like, let's talk about pain, right? So pain is a beautiful, beautiful part of life. I know it doesn't seem that way, right? But the pain is a wonderful, incredible part of life that when we live in the mind, when we live in that dual mind, then we're moving towards comfort and away from discomfort. We're moving towards pleasure and away from pain, right? Which is fine. It's a survival mechanism. It's a great way that the mind works. But if we're a slave to that mind, we're missing out on a whole bunch of shit. Right? We're missing out on half of life because pain is literally half of life. It's that whole duality thing, right? But when we come into the singularity, it includes everything. Now the suffering, which is also kind of an essential part because it's part of the process to learn all about it, but the suffering is how you relate to the pain. So the suffering is a layer on top of the pain. The pain is just, even physical pain, is just literally a message being sent back, you know, from somewhere in the body, from a nerve into the body, into the brain, and then we tell ourselves a story about that message. All it is an electrical impulse being sent back, right? And then there's the story that happens, and then all these chemicals that are released and shit like that, right? So it's the same thing with like anxiety, right? So regardless of any physiological things or anything like that, if you have anxiety, it's the layer on top of that. If you get anxiety about your anxiety, that's how it builds up into this chaos, this place of a panic attack, right? Can we be okay with just having anxiety? It's the anxiety about the anxiety that builds it up. And that kind of layer in our emotional state can cause chaos, right? So it's, you can have shame about being afraid. So not only are you afraid, now you're ashamed that you're afraid. And it's just these layers and layers and layers. And what happens is there's so many layers that we don't even know. When people ask you, how are you? You know, like, seriously, what are there, like 5 adjectives that you might use anytime anybody asks you how you are? Even the people that you're close to, and even if you're sharing something with them, right? It's like you might be good, bad, happy, sad, you know, whatever the fuck it is, right? But there's really not that much depth. There's tons of depth, but we're not recognizing that much depth. We're not having awareness. And I'm telling you, within these layers, until you've really experienced what it's like to be in absolute tremendous pain and at the same time be absolutely fulfilled and whole, it's incredible. You understand that they can coexist, that all these layers can coexist at the exact same time. Right? So that also happens in our physical practice as well, right down in the physical body. That happens with the muscles, the layers in. And actually, it's interesting when you step out of that dualistic idea of good, bad, right, and wrong, right? And when you're really looking at it, you understand that you might actually have to come out of what the pose would perfectly look like in the physical body to actually work a certain aspect of how you're getting into your practice. Right? So we have to stop worrying about what other people think, and that happens in our emotions as well too. So we went through a certain process. We're like, well, I know how this works. I mean, this happens all the time. It's spiritual elitism, right? So you get to a space where you can watch somebody, and actually the people that are the most fucked up might actually be doing the most work. They might not be, right? That's where we really don't know. But really, it's the people that might be wounded and ripped apart. It might be because they're actually digging deep down into their shit. They're pulling back those layers and willing to look at it. So the same thing in our physical practice. We can't be judging ourselves or others. We have to know that maybe they're doing something that may not look like it's supposed to look, but they're actually working to a different layer of understanding in that physical practice, right? So these layers, understanding the layers, can really transform our lives when we can learn to exist not just in one place. When we can learn to exist basically in those koshas, in those several bodies at once, and even layers within those bodies. So when we start to pull back the layers, right? We always talk about it as peeling back the layers of the onion, right? And when we start to pull back those layers, as long as we're doing the work and we're hearing the message, we can actually hear the same message again and again. We could be doing the same work again and again, but we're going to see it from different perspectives because we've pulled back layers now, right? And that's what happens with paradoxes and all this spiritual work. It's really because the paradox, it seems like a paradox, but it's really not, because it's just being viewed from a different perspective. It's being viewed originally from this perspective, and then when you actually get through all those layers back down to the core of the self and you view it from the other side, you see it completely differently. So the same thing looks like a paradox, but it's not really. And that happens from pulling back the layers and continuing to doing the same work. And there's a maturation that happens. You can actually see in your life, you know, how many times you're like, well, I thought of that differently, you know, when I was younger. Like, hindsight is 20/20 or whatever. Or I never would have thought of it that way, and now I see it differently, you know. And if you don't see it differently, fucking do something, because you need to change and grow. This is an intellectual understanding, this jnani perspective of understanding the layers, that the knowledge that all these sheaths are surrounding this perfect, immaculate self, which is the core of who we are, right? And when we're in the mind and emotions, we dedicate those mind and emotions from a bhakti perspective. It's about devotion to something higher, right? So it's something outside of ourselves. Oh, Krishna, Jesus, whatever it is, Yahweh, whatever it is, something outside of yourself. The jnani is like, no, it is yourself, right? But then the Ananya Bhakti, right? Which is, I think it's kind of fun, because it kind of says, it's a little bit of an onion. So when you pull back the layers, right? The Ananya Bhakti is really kind of a mixture of the Bhakti and the Jnani, where we recognize that it is something outside of ourselves when we're relating to the world through ourselves as the emotions and the mind, but it is actually ourselves that we're dedicating that mind and emotions to a higher aspect of ourselves. And that is Ananya Bhakti. And that is when we pull back and it can actually exist in these layers. That means you can be an absolute mess and absolutely beautifully perfect and pure and still at the same time. This is what the Bhagavad Gita talks about as actionless action. That at our core, we are that imperishable, unchanging, unmoving, steady, stable space that cannot move, that singularity that cannot move. There is nothing to be opposed to it. If you're in singularity, there has to be something opposed to have some sort of friction or a fight or a disturbance. There has to be something against it, right? In singularity, there's nothing to fight. So when we come from that space of singularity within ourselves, then the layers on top of those dualistic layers, then just take action. The core of who we are is completely actionless, and the rest of us takes action. And that, my friends, is actionless action of the layers. Peace! And Lakesha Lakin, I am you, you are me. Namaste, bitches. What? Too much?